Good morning, good late morning, good afternoon. Today's event is sponsored by Micro Focus and Vivit's local user groups in the Northeast and is being moderated by myself, Joe Madden, Vivit leader and president of Greenlight Group. Eric, you want to go to the next slide? Next slide. And then for today's speakers, we have four of us, myself included, Joe Madden again. I'm going to add color and talk to kind of some use cases that we're going to cover. I started Greenlight Group about 20 years ago in 2004, or 16 years ago in 2004. Legacy HP ITOM partner, and we are headquartered out of Salt Lake and cover pretty much the United States. With me, I have Julio Arteaga, who has been in the ADM space. His title is Application Development Management Solution Architect. With Micro Focus, been doing this for over 30 years and over 21 years with HP/Micro Focus. Julio has had several positions throughout his career that given him unique insight in the application lifecycle, and he's out of New York City. Next, we have Eric Fisher. Eric and I go way back. He is a senior solutions architect at Micro Focus. He is from the Opsware fraternity, so he's been with HP/Micro Focus for, I think, Eric, close to 13 years now. He works with some of the largest Fortune 500 companies in the US to evangelize automation, promote Micro Focus cloud and automation solutions, and help translate that automation into value. He's based out of Phoenix and has been doing this for well over 20 years. Finally, Chris Monroe, a solution architect with Greenlight Group. Chris is employee number 3 and been with me since 2005. He has spent time in just about every one of the major themes under the ITOM umbrella, but for the last 6 years, he's been leading and driving our automation practice. And I think with that, we'll move on. Housekeeping, just a couple things here. Today's live session is intended for all Vivit members. The on-demand recording, slide deck, and questions and answers will be posted on the Vivit website, visible to all members. Additionally, today's slide deck, question and answers, and on-demand recording will be made available to you. We will send you a link via email once they are posted to the website. If you have any questions as we go along, please type and send them using the questions pane in the webinar control panel. Eric, next slide. All of you should see some version of this. The idea is to be able to take your questions down there where the arrow points. And then finally, a little bit of a disclosure here. In order to receive your dining card, you must have registered with a valid business email, no Gmail, Yahoo, and attend the full event. Please note that this is subject to validation by Micro Focus gift and hospitality policy. Next slide. The agenda. So we're doing the intro. We're going to talk a little bit about what's new in RPA 2011. Eric's going to lead with an overview and then a demo. Then we're off to Julio to talk about UFT, what's new there. And then we're going to break into some tips and tricks led by Julio around UFT and Chris Monroe around OO best practices. And then we'll discuss a couple of use cases around banking and onboarding, just to kind of highlight some examples and some of the challenges that were addressed there. But before I do that, we've got a couple polling questions to kind of get a sense of who's in the audience. So let's do the first one. Are you a current Micro Focus customer? Please select one. We'll give you a couple minutes. Not minutes, but a couple seconds here. Okay, let's show the results. Okay, so a high number of non-customers. That's good. That's interesting. Okay. Next question, please. I think the question will be, if you are a Micro Focus customer, do you use ADM tools, ITOM tools, or both? Okay, let's look at the results there. Okay, so both, actually, that's interesting. Okay. Not surprised about the ADM number. Okay, and then the final question. Are you currently using an RPA solution? So any vendor solution is the qualification there. So we're not looking explicitly Micro Focus, but just any vendor solution. Okay, let's take a look at those results. Okay, so 50-50. All right, Eric, so looks like we've got a high number of non-customers, but as we would expect of the user group, customers, and an interesting hybrid of both, and then some heavy on the ADM side. So anyways, without further ado, Eric, I'll hand the ball to you.
Thank you, Joe. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. So again, my name is Eric, and I'm going to be taking you through kind of a high-level overview of what robotic process automation is, some key characteristics of it, what it's being used for, and then we'll dig into some of the really interesting features that we've introduced in the last 6 or 9 months. And then finally, we'll show you the actual product in action, so gives you a better sense of how it works. So first, RPA, what it is, for those of you that are not aware, is RPA is really a tool to mimic the human actions in order to automate a process. There's various aspects to that around how well you can detect screen records. Is it a video recorder? Is it a macro recorder? Is it actually looking at objects? Things like that. And then there's a sub capability of this in what's called enterprise class RPA, and it really takes all of what RPA is, but is designed to run this in a 7x24 mission critical way, where data security, auditability, scalability, and resiliency are important to that, so that it's running at all times for the ability to replay business processes or IT or business critical processes as well. When you look at RPA, there isn't an industry that RPA provides value to, and here is just a small subset of some of the more common use cases that we've found over the years of providing RPA solutions. But there's use cases around accounting and customer service, HR, IT. There's a lot of RPA type of use cases, and sales. Just to name a few of them. In one example, in accounting is a good example. Is we have our own use case. As our chief product officer likes to use the expression, drink our own champagne, or some places they say eat our own dog food. But the idea is we are a multinational company dealing with international exchange rates. Prior to using RPA for this one use case, we had an individual that every day part of her job was to log in to download the latest exchange rates, manipulate the data a little bit, and import it into our back-end business accounting and finance tools. That would normally take 20 minutes, and is something that somebody had to do on a daily basis, or we'd run the risk of some sort of a security exchange violation or a business audit to challenge for ourselves. We automated that through using our RPA tool. It runs automatically, completely headless, and does everything that person did on a daily basis. And so now what we've done is gone from a person taking 20 minutes out of their day to do this particular task to an automated process that takes 3 to 5 minutes and is done not only every day, but it's done at a consistent time. And because exchange rates even change over the weekend to an extent, we run this 6 days a week. So when you think about the impact to an organization, right? We went from one person that it was their full responsibility with 2 backups, so now we have just a backup resource in case something happens. We don't have to train a replacement. We don't have to worry about covering it if we have to take PTO, time off, or sick for any reason. We're not able to do that job. So pretty key on that. And again, there's use cases for all the other different fields as well. So what makes our Micro Focus RPA stand out? What were our design goals? And so, ultimately, everything we did around, building an RPA product was with the ultimate goal of providing a faster time to value and a lower total cost of ownership. We've designed the license and acquisition model to be very, very simple. In other words, we just charge, for each concurrent use case that you want to run, or what we call an RPA bot. So for each concurrent one that needs to run at the same time, you have to have a license. So for most customers, 2, 5, 10, depending on your requirement to do concurrency. If you underbuy, as an example, and you have 5 running workflows, when the 6th one starts to run, it'll basically wait in a queue until the next one runs. So that was kind of our design goal, and along with these 4 other pillars, right? There's ease of use, resiliency, a powerful orchestrator, and security. So from an ease of use perspective, really this is, being able to implement a codeless or what they call a no-code design model. So it's a drag and wire, or record and playback model. You can present everything in a coding language so that you can modify or update or even author things using coding in your favorite design tool, your IDE. But for most customers, no code requirement or extensive training is required in order to do very sophisticated use cases. Second, if you are a UFT customer, you probably understand what we're talking about here. So a little bit of a background: we've actually taken UFT's engine and we've embedded it into our RPA product. So all of the bells and whistles and the functional capability that we have in UFT around intelligent object recognition, AI, natural language processing, machine learning, all of that is being made available just as a consequence of embedding that engine into our RPA. So why this is important, and the feedback we get most common, is that the other RPA products in the industry have a very tough time around not just interpreting it during a recording session, but finding the different elements, where you've clicked, where you've typed, what kind of a field is this? Is it radio buttons? Is it a layered HTML? Be able to find those elements, translate them, and replay those consistently. If we use a standard SaaS application, let's say Salesforce.com as an example, each user has the ability to customize their color scheme, their menu placement, what menus are hidden and exposed, which makes it very difficult to automate if you're trying to create an automation that runs across many users, right? Where did the cases menu go? Where does the opportunity menu go? And so not only are we able to follow the mouse and what we're actually clicking on, but we can even use things like screen-based object character recognition to see where a particular text element is on the screen. We can even use natural language processing to determine the difference between the word welcome and welcoming, and make a best match, so that we, again, the ultimate goal is not having to re-record every single time something changes or we detect a slight nuance in the user experience. Now, the third thing is also a part of the the history of what we've been doing at Micro Focus, and the heritage of the software as it came from HP and HPE, and that's the orchestration engine. So we have a product called Operations Orchestration in our portfolio, and just like what we've done with UFT, we've embedded the Operations Orchestration Engine into the RPA product as well. All in all, it's the same design experience. It's a consistent look and feel. It all feels like it was designed together as one element, but we're taking the strengths from each one of our products and bolting them together in a purpose-built way. Operations Orchestration was originally designed for API, command line, basically a programmatic means for orchestrating IT processes. It always lacked the ability to go to a screen or a terminal, something that was not IT based, to go and interact with it. And that's really where the UFT engine comes into place. But it is very capable, very powerful, very scalable orchestration engine. It's based on an N-tier architecture, which is what the foundation of what RPA is. So you've got a database layer, you've got your runtime engine, you've got your designer, you've got your load balancer, and all of your robot and process engines that run across the environment. So this can be, in the case of my demo environment, I've got everything installed on one server, but this can be scaled out to take care of what some of our customers are running tens of thousands of workflows a day. So highly scalable. And then finally, when you start talking about enterprise class RPA, it is really important to make sure that you have correct logging and auditability, detailed activity logs, so that not only can you find issues in the the automation as they occur. Is your endpoint responding correctly? Are you getting password errors? But also, if you have to, prove that a certain process is running a certain way, that you have an audit engine that you can show an auditor or some sort of a compliance officer to ensure that you are doing a process a certain way, that somebody's not, cutting a corner or doing something incorrectly. All right, so that's a little bit of what RPA is and in our implementation of it. Talk a little bit about what we've done in the last half year or so in our release. So we've been releasing RPA updates on a quarterly basis. Our most recent one came out in November, and we are tentatively scheduled to have one out in late winter, early spring. Our RPA product, Micro Focus RPA, is actually just celebrated its 5th release, so it's a little over 1 year old as an actual product. What's interesting about RPA is that we had customers that were using a combination of OO and UFT together for about the last 5 years, and it was only about 3 years ago that we decided to take that design and create a product out of it. And what we've done in the last release is first of all, we've incorporated a couple different license models that are unique in the industry. Right, it's not an a la carte, you pay for use cases or pay for every node and pay for developer license. It's an all-inclusive license based off of concurrency, as I said before. But now we have the concept of being able to add additional bot hours to it. So if you want to buy 5 concurrent process flows, and then you have an end of month process that you want to be able to scale unlimited, you can actually apply a bot hour license. We sell them in packs of 200 hours, and it will just consume as unlimited as you want to throw resources at it. You can run end of month, end of quarter, financial reports, or however you want to scale this up. So it gives you another license model that you can mix and match based on your use case. Second, we've been putting a lot of effort and energy into advancing in new areas around AI, natural language processing, and machine learning. And really the key objective there is, as I pointed out before, is making the design experience that much simpler. If you don't have to think about what an object is or where it is or what it's called, or clicking in the exact same spot, or if you have a layered HTML page that you're trying to interact with, how do you interpret a menu that's sitting on top of some other object in the background? And really these capabilities extend our ability to allow you just to simply do what you intend to do, click where you intend to click, and don't worry about, are we interpreting it correctly? Just let the software take care of that for you. We've also, in the last 6 months, built in a ROI dashboard. In fact, it's quite a bit more than an ROI dashboard. You can probably call it an analytics dashboard for how this product works, how long each flow is taking with the top flows that are running. The reason why we call it an ROI dashboard, though, is we track the actual time consumed for each one of the running processes. And as a designer, an author, you get to specify, okay, if this was run by a human, this particular process would have taken 20 minutes, going back to the exchange rate example I gave before. And now we can compare that with how long it actually took. And so if it took through automation 3 minutes, but a manual process was 20 minutes, every time this runs, we'd increment the counter by 17 minutes. And not only will we present you with a number of minutes saved through automation, but the dashboard will even show you $1 saved if you put your FTE or your fully burdened cost of your engineers and your users into the system. And so this is kind of your self-justification process, if you will. Show that it's showing value and that it's returning value back to the business and to the users that are using it. The fourth is really to extend into the notion of automated attended automation. In other words, what happens when your process gets to a fork and you have to make a decision and actually involve a person, whether it's opening a ticket and waiting for a response, or pausing the workflow and having somebody choose which response to go. A good example of this might be a process that is designed for doing a a disk space file system cleanup. You may the first part of the flow is to determine where the problem lies, what temp file, folder, log, etc. is filled. And then you may want to ask the user, hey, we found that your log files are 20 gigabytes of your 25 gigs of space. Do you want to truncate your logs, or do you want to move them to an external storage before deleting them? Right, so those kind of decisions you may want to bring a person into to make some sort of a business decision. We've done a lot of work around, we call them worker groups technically, but think of them as skills or locations as well. So a worker or a robot can actually serve multiple purposes. It can be there for specific applications it has access to, a specific credentials it has access to, a specific location it may be running in, or just purely for scale. So we've actually done a lot to create, skill groups and worker groups so that you can decide when you're designing a flow, not just one specific bot you want to run on, but maybe you have 5 bots that all have the same credential access and have the same base applications running on it, same environment. You want to run on any one of those 5 and kind of load balance across those 5. The next one kind of goes into, when you start looking at a little bit more of the advanced functionality around flow authoring and bot authoring, is how do you do inline filtering of your parameters, your commands, your API calls, etc. So a lot of embedding code type of things, or what we call functions, into our graphical design elements, so that you don't have to actually know how to script, but you can get some very powerful scripting type of elements into the flow authoring. Second to last is, we did introduce, actually this came out in November. If you pull out your iPhone, for instance, and look up the Micro Focus RPA, you will find a mobile client. This allows you to access RPA through your cell phone using a mobile app. This is not quite the design experience, but anything having to do on the execution and the engine side of things. So all the analytics and the runtime, and be able to launch flows, from any type of a user. Flow status, bot status, the status of all your engines, are they all up and running? What's the status of your cluster? Things like that. And then for those customers that want to try it out or build a lab environment, last year we did introduce a very simple installer that goes through and installs everything, either in a single box or across a small cluster of servers for you. So no needing, having to go through a checklist installer to make sure everything is done in the right order. It actually will install everything from the database to the load balancer, identity management, and everything else. So it is a enterprise application without having to, learn how to install enterprise applications. The installer does it for you. So to go through just a couple screenshots, things I'm not going to show you in the demonstration, but to give you some visuals. This is the license management screen, so you can quickly see in here, how many concurrent bot licenses. This happens to have 1,000 concurrent RPA bot licenses running or available to it, and you can see this demo has 0 running. So as this runs, as you're using, as you're consuming resources, this will slide up and down and show you the actual status. And then you can drill into this to see what use case is running it, how many servers a single use case is running across, things like that. And then the second part of this has to do with those RPA bot hours I mentioned, where you can scale well beyond the concurrent limit. So if you had an end of month process, you can actually just throw a bunch of hours at it, and it will just crank through those, and we'll even send you out notification when you start reaching a threshold, and you get to set those thresholds yourself. You can define as a administrator what pool of resources that you want this to run against, whether it is a set of physical servers or VMs or location, but also which license type that you want to consume. Mentioned the RPA, AI, and machine learning, natural language processing capabilities. Really, the key, as I mentioned before, is to identify the objects the same way a human does, using cognitive recognition, and be able to interact, manipulate it using some of the same brain processes that you'd be using, effectively building a neural network within this. And then, the end goal is to create a an environment where you don't have to think as much around programming the logic and just let the logic learn from itself. And a key part of that is what we've actually built into the recording system itself. So we have, and this came out in our last release, a new UI inspector. And not only does this look at the screen, you can see all the pink boxes that are drawn as an example, but when you have the recorder running, it will highlight all of the different fields, what it is interpreting, the different words. So even if it says sign in with Facebook, if this was written in an image, we'd be able to read that and not just look at the object tag underneath in the HTML, but actually read what the button is saying and do an interpretation of the object based off of what it's actually saying. Not only do we create that, but we have a new object SPY itself. So as you're looking at, whether it's a web interface, an SAP client, a terminal emulator, normally we'd be looking at the object. This will actually give you a lot of exposure into what the objects are. And if there's something it doesn't actually know how to interpret, you can flag it, and that flag will get sent back to us, assuming you've got the right proxy set up. And we will learn that, hey, user is struggling with being able to learn some object from a Salesforce.com application. And we'll work on that and try and improve the technology over time. So the next release will have better recognition of a particular element that you're missing. So it's a little bit of a crowdsourcing, if you will, to make sure that as new interfaces and new applications come around, that we're continuously learning from our user base. I will show you this a little bit more detail in the demo, but this is the dashboard I was referring to, all of the metrics, and this is included in the product. No additional license fee or installation required. All of the metrics, all of the times, the errors, everything gets collected in this dashboard. You can customize it, show the results of what you want to make it very, very clear as you log in what the environment is doing. Human in the loop, we talked about this, is around, I want to make a human decision, and the flow is going to take a pause to let you make a decision to determine, what needs to be done. Is approval required? Is it just a human decision required, et cetera? I'm going to show you this a little bit more in the demo as well, but out-of-the-box filters in the workflow designer. So when you can take a variable and very quickly take one of the the functions applied to it, convert string to lowercase is probably one of the more common use cases to talk about. But I can take a previous step output and convert that all to lowercase just by simply clicking the function that I want to apply to that value. And finally, because I can't show you this in the demo, I do want to expose to you the Rpa Mobile Client. So anything that you can do in our Rpa server environment, we call Rpa Central, you'll be able to see the Runtime Explorer, you'll be able to set up notifications, launch workflows, launch bots, see the dashboard, everything we showed in the previous screen, but see them in the mobile client as well. All right, so the demo that I'm going to be running here is as I mentioned, it's an all-in-one. Everything is installed in the same environment, but functionally it's broken down into 4 components. There's the recorder, which is part of the authoring experience. There's the designer, which is also part of the authoring experience. The designer is a web-based interface. We use a lot of dynamic HTML to be able to allow for drag and wire right in the GUI. So all the authoring capabilities fully exposed in a web interface. The orchestrator itself, this is part of the what we call Rpa Central, so the server engine with permissions, with tracking usage, with users, identity management. Everything is built into that layer. And then finally is the highly scalable robot army, if you will. So this can be scaled out as large as you need. So this can be and it can be purpose-built groups of robots as well. So you can have a group of 5 robots for interacting with SAP, another 5 for interacting with your Windows services environment, your Active Directory and things like that. And now we're going to go off to the demo. And as was mentioned before, if you have any questions as we go through this, feel free to type them into the question manager. If anything is relevant, Chris or Joe will interrupt me, and we'll answer those questions in real time. Otherwise, we'll take any questions and answer anything left at the end. So the first thing I want to expose you to is the Rpa Central. I'm not going to do a whole lot in here, just to kind of show you around a little bit. But this is the built-in analytics engine. As I mentioned, the really key thing is this is included, part of the product, part of the license, no additional cost required. There is a data warehouse that sits behind here and collects all the results. And every time a flow runs, it doesn't run, the execution time, the average execution time versus the current, all of that is available, and I can customize this as necessary. And where it gets this data from is actually in the run management logs themselves. So this is not the audit trail. We actually have a very specific audit trail. This is more just kind of the presentation of the individual logs. Let's see if I can find something with an error in here. I don't have anything very interesting, but we'll take one of these. Just open this up. So every step in the workflow, if there's an error, every step is going to be accounted for and logged. So if there's an action, if there was a loop and has more, if I select any one of these, I can see all of the inputs as well as the results that are accumulated. So anything that's standard in, standard out, if you're familiar with those, as well as standard error. So anything that's an error condition, an output to a screen, output to a terminal, output to a command, an input, everything that we do in every single step is logged. So when it started, when it finished, if there was a response time, what the inputs for the step was. So we got count 86, there's a variable called reset and it's set to false, et cetera. So as you need to diagnose and debug your problems, you can very quickly see where your issues are. If I scroll through here, very quickly color coding any errors, and I do not see any errors until we get to the very bottom. In this case, because this is a demo flow, of course, I don't really have anything very interesting to show. So every use case, every flow, who ran it? In this case, again, everything is being run by an admin, but if you had 100 different users in your environment executing workflows, you'd see the different users, how long they took, the different use cases, and be able to drill into this in detail. From the same interface, I can actually manually launch workflows. I can also do it through a scheduler. I can also do it through a command line or an API call. So I can embed this as, some might call it glue between multiple products, or to kind of have one product kick off the a workflow to go and fix a problem, for instance. And you can do all of that, build the glue in here that's kicked off from an external API call. So one example of that might be if you look at your service management tool, whether it's, Micro Focus's Smacks product or, some other third-party service desk tool, in the catalog, let's say I have a use case to reset a user password. When somebody orders that particular end user service fulfillment, what it will do is kick off a process in here to go and run with the right context being set, who the user is, what the authentication is approval required, et cetera, and it will go and take care of that. One of the more common use cases for HR type of use cases in our RPA space is an HR onboarding workflow. So I can have, for instance, a bunch of recordings that I've set up, one to create a new Active Directory user, one to create a new user in WebEx, and one to create a new user in Office 365, string those together with some conditional logic, and then all I have to do is open up simple web form, fill it out, hit go, and it's going to go and launch that use case and run it end to end. And to show you an example of that self-service, if you don't have your own self-service interface, one thing we've included is our own self-service portal. Designed very simply, I don't have anything in HR, but I do have something in IT, and I have something in AOS. So AOS is our Advantage Online Shopping, which I'll introduce you that in a few moments. This is a fictitious application for kind of a shopping cart system in an online store. But you can see right here, so just like a HR onboarding use case, I've got to register users. I can click on there. I don't need to know anything about the process. The user is decided to expose, or the author has decided to expose a whole bunch of parameters to me. If all I cared about was, let me go back to this other one, register a single user. Username test123 and the password cloudit123, test user, hit submit. It's all I need to know about the process. This is going to go into our online shopping application and add a user to that. In a moment, we might actually see, depending on where the bot's running, I've got a bot running on this particular server itself, and it should go and trigger the bot to actually execute. We look at the status. This is the status of our job. And as a user, I can actually click on that and effectively follow the bouncing ball. In a moment, I expect to see it running on a different tab. Of course, like all good demos, they don't always run perfectly. This should actually be running. Oh, here it goes. It's just a little slow. Pulls up the Advantage Online Shopping application, creates a new user. You can see the information I put in there, test123, test@microfocus.com. Now the user is created. So now if you had a full HR onboarding use case, you could actually go not just to your shopping app, to your internal procurement app, your credit card system to get a company credit card for the employee, to create their email service and everything else. All right, so I'm going to let that kind of do its thing on the side and introduce you to the designer itself. This is where the magic happens when you're trying to author a workflow. And here's a quick example. This is a very simple use case where this is going to register that user. In fact, actually, that is what we just watched happen, was this register user activity. There's an output for that goes to a string equals. In other words, this string equals is looking to make sure that this process was successful. If it was successful, it can go to your success path. If you want to take action, if it was not successful, maybe try again, but increment the username, append a character or a number to the end of it. I can actually have the string equals iterate back to the original flow and increment the username by 1. So add a second character or a third character to the end of the username. Now this, it's highlighted with this little circle, the dot, kind of a bullseye. This is supposed to represent a record button, but this is our recorded session. And I can have a library of these. And in fact, you can see in my project on the left, I've got a number of project files. So these are the things I'm actually working on, but I also have a number of dependencies as well. And while this isn't an exhaustive list, if I go through here and kind of open some of these up, I can see that I've got tasks around, network management and Active Directory, operations for, different operating systems. If I pull up Windows, for instance, I can do, pings and restart Windows and, restart application, copy and get, files, compare queries. So there's about out of the box, between out of the box and what we have available on our marketplace, depending on the version release of all of the third parties that we support, is between 6,000 and 8,000 different objects, operations, integrations that we have out of the box with a lot of the common big named applications. But when you have something you want to record, and that's really what this icon represents, I can actually record this, I can parameterize it and make this completely reusable. So anytime I want to register a user in this particular application, all I have to do is just drag this out of my palette and I can reuse this particular step. And this step is represented, this because it's a recording, I can see all the different steps that this is taking. Because the screen recording is not actually a video recording, there's no sense of timing between each of these steps. So if I am clicking on a field and I need to have it wait 30 seconds to go to the next field because it's having to download some information, I can actually very easily add a wait state. So just hit the add, put in my wait state there. If I want to get some more information on, something I've clicked or parameterized, in this case, parameterization of my username, I can, pick a value or a variable. I can also see all of the different object recognition elements. So the input tag, the name of the object itself, and the type of the field. So all of this kind of contributes to the recognition of where I'm clicking, where I'm typing. I'm going to run a quick use case myself and show you how easy it is to actually make a recording. In this case, we're going to create a new project, and it's going to be similar to what the one we're just going through, but we're going to call it AOS users. So the project is called AOS users, and I'm going to call the task in here. AOS user create. So this is the RPA activity I'm going to record. Now it opens up my palette. In this case, it starts empty. One thing you'll notice is it says import from UFT. Well, this is really interesting because if you have UFT and you've written code, scripts, test scenarios that you want to use as part of RPA, you can actually import that directly from your set of projects in UFT. So it allows for yet another, very quick, easy way to reuse content. In my case, I'm just going to use the recorder itself, and I've preset the recorder to open up a web browser. When I hit the record button, let me close this out and minimize so I can see what I'm doing. When I hit record, if this works correctly, and it does, it will open up the Advantage Online Shopping application in my browser of choice. And what I want to do is record just the simple process of, in this case, I'm just going to order a product. So I'm going to click the Shop Now under Tablets. Scroll down, I want to order this particular G2 tablet, add to cart, and we'll call that done just for simplicity. I'm going to stop, you'll see the 3 steps. Now, one thing that's very interesting about this as well is because we are looking at a very specific protocol, web browser inside of Chrome, for instance, it's going to ignore everything else. So as I move the recorder around, if I were doing something else during the process, if I had to bring up Notepad and look at my notes on how to go through a process, none of that will get recorded. Only the interaction with the browser that I've chosen will get recorded. Similar would be if I'm opening up a Rumba terminal client or an SAP thick client. It will only record the interactions with the interfaces that I've specified.
Hey, Eric, we need to wrap up and move on, but I do have a couple questions that I think probably are appropriate for you to visit on at this point, both from Shad Wahab.
All right, and I just wanted to show one more, let me just show one more quick thing once this gets imported, and that is what people would see normally as UFT. You can see the exposure. So if you have a need to do some more advanced editing, so I just recorded something and here's my 3 clicks, but if I want to re-record, if I want to make changes, if I want to use my knowledge of UFT, I can actually edit this and it'll actually load this up in our, what we call the activity designer. For those of you using UFT, you'll recognize interface. Why change what isn't broken? So we're basically reusing the full interface with the full experience. And in just a moment, you'll actually see this open up. And while this is opening, Joe, why don't you go ahead and ask that question?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, that's one of the most powerful pieces of this from my perspective. If you're a UFT customer, the presumption is you've got test scripts for all this, or for your critical things, and to be able to recycle them just drives time to value. Shad's first question is, and I'm not sure I get it, but maybe you can discern it better. Can you also touch upon the capabilities to edit the design or scripts logic of the bots? Basically, how easy it is to manage changes, and are such changes auditable?
Yep. So everything that we do, whether it is This particular step right here, everything is captured in text, and you'll integrate this with your source code management like Git. And so anytime you're working on something, you check your project into Git, and you record your notes on what you changed, what you authored. So your normal source code management type of behaviors. So if you made a change or a functionality and make the change, it will actually capture everything. The differences between the last two check-ins, as well as the comments that were done on check-in as well. So this is the actual, underlying code, and you can open this up in your IDE as well if you want to have a kind of a dual authoring experience. Or if you go back to, similar thing here with that RPA Advanced Editor. If I want to modify this, if I want to change or delete a step, I can actually do it right at the scripting level. I can now switch over to the object level as well, and I can see the object view of everything. So if I wanted to make a change, reparameterize, change the value, it's all available in this interface. So hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, and then the other questions, which I know the answer is yes, but I want to give you a shot at this, is for the input data elements, can you define variables or logic to fetch data from a data source or create logical values combining various synthetic and other inputs? Basically, parameterize the inputs.
Yeah,
you want
absolutely.
To talk about?
Yeah, so when you're creating, let me just switch back over here and close the screen.
This will also be a good topic for Julio as he digs into UFT, because that's really, there's a layer there too, but please
Yep, so just like any other programming language, although this isn't really a programming language, you get to define what your values are that you care about. They're going to be parameterized. In this case, we've captured URL, username, password, first name, last name, etc. So if you had other values that you wanted to ask for at instantiation time, this is where this gets filled in. So this information gets, if it doesn't know it, if it can't, if it's not prepended with a default value, then it will prompt the user for it. Or if you're launching this from an API, you basically would just send the values through the API. So that's one thing. Second thing is we have a bunch of, pretty much all the major databases, MySQL, Postgres, Oracle, SQL, etc., Sybase even. We can go to a database to go and pull data in. So we can do SQL queries, lookups of any data to fill in these parameters as well. And then the final way is we can actually bring this information in from a text-based file. So we can natively read in a Excel file, for instance, and parse out and comma separate, use the comma separation to understand the username field, et cetera, and map each one of those different columns into a parameter of your flow that you've built out. So a lot of different ways that you can bring data into through the parameterization.
Okay, so with this, let's pass the baton over to Julio so he can take this from the ADM side. So Julio, I know we're going to do some handoff here. I'll let you take it over.
Yep. Okay, great. And hopefully everybody can see my screen. So good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. My name is Julio Arteaga, Solution Architect, and I want to take you through a couple of slides, talk a little bit about UFT. Right now, some of you, from what I saw in the survey, might have experience with UFT, Unified Functional Testing. Now, it's been around for quite some time, so it's a very mature product, very mature platform. But we've really taken it great steps to the future, right? We've really enhanced the product, we've added features and functionality, and really made it part of an overall solution. Now, most of you know this solution from a testing perspective, right? So we can do functional testing, mobile device testing, mobile applications, different types of applications, web, and so on and so forth. But I want to take you through a couple of slides of what the current state of the product is, right, and what it brings to the table. And then I'm gonna do a point and click demo, right? Just a very quick show some best practices, specifically around UFT, but also how UFT and how it applies to the RPA solution as well. But essentially, this slide that you're looking at is really representative of what the main value of UFT today is. What is the focus area where it stands, right? So it's gone way beyond the tradition of simply doing functional testing, pointing and clicking on an object and recording a business process and playing it back and hoping to catch something that happens, right? It's also about resiliency. Create it once and use enough intelligence and automation built into the product so that it really is resilient. And that's huge, right? Because part of this conversation that we've been having now for the past hour or so is really about making and creating a repeatable process, something that is reliable. Hence, resiliency must be a part of the equation. So that's a huge part of this. The other thing is efficiency, right? Being able to break the skills barrier. Let the software do a lot of the work for you. So the days of putting together a script and coding in C language or some C-like language and hoping that you can debug this thing as fast as possible and getting the right skill set, and you almost needed a PhD, as I like to joke, in order to have a successful functional test. It shouldn't be the case today. You invest in software, you invest in these different platforms, and the technology is available today so that we let the machines do the work for us. We build enough AI into the tools and the products so that they find the needles in the haystack, as opposed to us as humans having to go into the haystack and hope that we catch something before it becomes a problem. And then scalability is a big part of this equation, right? So it's about reducing the wait times, getting from point A to point B faster. So that means, for example, if you're working in the context of a project or a timeline, especially in an agile type of environment, right, you need to deliver something to the business that's viable in 2 weeks or 4 weeks, whatever that process is. So when we talk about RPA, right, we're talking about using UFT to create some of the steps in this RPA process. However, the same concepts apply. You want to be able to deliver fast. You want to be able to create a script that is resilient, efficient, and that can meet the needs of that end user, who's ultimately going to be the consumer of this particular solution, right? So this is the 3 primary tenets today. Now, with that being said, right, we've been busy. We've really expanded this platform quite a bit. Now, I'm not going to go into every single detail here because some of these items are kind of minor, but there are a few major ones that I want to call out that I really want to focus on. And one of those big ones is AI-based enhancements. What does that mean? Simply stated, like I said, we're letting the software do a lot of the work for us, right? So anybody who has used any functional testing tool in the past, one of the biggest challenges is how does it recognize this object? How does it work with this particular button or frame or drop down? And in many cases, it breaks the script, right? Either because the framework that's used is a third-party vendor that hasn't released all the details so that we can work with it properly, or maybe it's just simply a problem at the machine level. It's not able to recognize the object. That breaks the script, and now you're looking for solutions such as using XY coordinates, which is really not the way to go with these things. Well, AI technology really is a game changer because now it adds an additional way of recognizing objects as they appear on the screen, right? So if an object changes position or if it changes a bit of its layout, it's not going to break the script. So it really changes the way that we interact with the application under test. One of the other big things is virtualization and containerization. You'll notice that we support Hyper-V, so now we can run test cases on Hyper-V. We also support Docker containers as well, which is on the next slide, but I'll jump the gun and we'll talk about Docker. We're able to run API tests within a Docker container. And again, these are pretty big changes. These are things that are very evolutionary because it really changes the way that we interact with the environment. Whereas before you had a physical machine or perhaps a virtual machine executing these test cases, and that machine was essentially unusable for the length of the test. That's no longer the case. Now through virtualization and containerization, we are able to put that off to the side to another location, to another machine, in this case, a virtual machine and a hypervisor and a Docker container, so that we're able to continue working on the physical machine. So that really, what it boils down to is doing more with less. You're getting to that finish line, delivering something to the business, in this particular case, perhaps to the RPA team. You've debugged it, you've worked on it, you tested it, and now you're able to deliver the solution to the end party as well. Now, we continue to improve the user interface. We continue to improve the technology stacks that we support. So we do support some of the newer Java technologies, OpenJDK as well, of course, Oracle JDK as well, mobile API, SAP. So we do support a wide breadth of technology. So, you know, the support is out there, and we also interact with or become part of your CI/CD delivery pipeline. That's huge as well, because that means that, you know, UFT now becomes part of a deliverable, part of a tool chain that is part of your continuous testing, continuous delivery. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, what kind of impact does that have in the RPA space, right? Because ultimately, you know, this is going to become a process in that workflow that we saw earlier, right? Well, it still has an impact, because no matter what, someone needs to test the script. It needs to be executed, it needs to be run. So it does need an environment, and ideally, it should be something that is automated as much as possible. So instead of a manual process where I create a script and I run it 10 times and hope that it runs and it finishes running and goes through all the verifications, I can make this part of a CI/CD pipeline where I commit the code to a repository, and that kicks off a build, and that delivers a report that says, okay, we're ready to go to the next step. So it really adds automation to that process all the way through the end. Now you see some of these other items like Safari support, right? So we support our colleagues that use the Macs as well, right? So they're able to run some of these via an agent as well. So this, you can see it's come quite far as just simply being a testing tool for record playback type of technologies. Now, the latest release, just so everybody knows that it's out there, is officially 15.01. That's the release that's generally available out there to the public. And once again, you know, AI is the big thing in this particular case. Also, we support Chromium, right? So we're supporting Edge, Microsoft Edge. So we're keeping up with the latest technologies. Now, you know, dark theme has always been, it's funny, because that's always been one of the things that always come back to us. Hey, do you have dark theme? Because everybody seems to be using that today. But we finally do support dark theme as well. And then I want to finish up on this slide with two major points, right? And that is object to character recognition and ABI support, right, for their object recognition technology as well. So again, this really addresses the needs of the wider community, where instead of simply object recognition, now we're able to recognize you know, actual OCR characters within a PDF document, within a web page, and so on. So they're recognized as proper objects. And as I said earlier, we've taken Docker containers or containerization all the way out to API testing. So in UFT, those of you that have used it before, you know that UFT can be used for GUI testing. So that's your traditional front-end web page, mobile application, and so on. But we can also use it for API testing. So your REST services, your traditional SOAP services, and so on, can be tested using the same UFT platform, same executable. You know, the scripting is going to be a little bit different, of course, because of the nature of the beast, but you're using a common platform. So ultimately, right, as I said, resiliency is a big part of this. And, you know, resiliency is huge because, again, it's about reusability. It's about making it a repeatable process. And that's where UFT also shines quite a bit. And in fact, let's talk about this resiliency. Now, resiliency, it goes beyond just the object recognition. It's also about the design process of the test, right, of the script itself. And I want to talk a little bit about that. I want to, you know, spend the slide on this and then actually point and click through a couple of points so that it really resonates. But really, you know, when it comes to tips and tricks, two major things stick out when it comes to having an impact in the RPA space. And that is leveraging modular design, right? I can't stress this enough. Now, it's tempting, right, for the group that has used UFT for years for functional testing, right? You create a single script, one big action, you put it together in a single action. Perhaps it's a page or two of code or of scripting, and that works, right? That really works. And, you know, you run the script and you get your results, and it's a single process that runs a single time, and then you repeat it. Now, modularity is key, though, because as you start building these different assets, right? Now, remember, these are applications in the RPA space that are going to interact with a huge range of systems and applications, banking systems, payroll applications, mobile applications. There's going to be underlying file system operations, and so on and so forth. You're really going to be expanding the number of assets that you have. And ideally, you want to start early with structuring your scripts in such a way that they're shareable and that they're modularized. So in other words, maintenance is reduced drastically. So instead of chasing down 15 different scripts, you have one function. If your login function changes, you only need to change it in one place because it's being called by multiple scripts, right? So you see the point here is that you're visiting one location. If there's any failures, if there's any bugs that are introduced as part of this maintenance process, you're really introducing them in one single location. So it really drives things, makes things a lot easier. Also for documentation and for knowledge, right, for other users as well. Remember, there's going to be other folks that are going to be responsible for for maintaining the scripts, right? So they need to have a certain degree of documentation. So you want to make sure that this is something that is well documented, well modularized, and that it is really a true library asset. Now, in addition to that, I didn't list it here separately, but I'm going to show you, it really is very simple. Single click on the script. You want to start using a repository for your scripts. And this makes it also, kind of that library concept. One single place where folks can go in and pull out a script, run it, debug it, make sure that it works before throwing it over the wall to the next to the next process. In this case, which would be the Rpa workflow. Now, building with resiliency in mind, and I keep on harping on this, right? But this is huge because part of robotic process automation is removing the human being from the equation, right? We want to reduce errors. We want to make sure that this is something that, hey, I can run this for a year, 2 years before we even have to do any maintenance and touch it any way or fashion. Now, what are some of the things that come back to haunt you as far as maintenance? Well, part of the things that come back to haunt you are things like object changes. If an object changes, changes a little bit in spelling or changes a little bit in location, those are the things that are going to come back to haunt you. So you want to make sure that you go into this with an open mind. When you're identifying objects, make sure that you're not tying yourself statically to that exact option as well. So you want to make sure that you design things in an open fashion. You want to make sure that you're not bound to the underlying exact GUID or the object identifier if possible. And you certainly want to avoid things like XY coordinates or looking for an object on the screen and clicking on it based on the exact dimensions of the object or something like that. So let's go ahead. I'm going to point and click through a couple of things real quickly, show you some of these concepts that we just talked about, and then we'll turn it back to the team if there's no questions. So what I'm showing you here is UFT 15.01. This is the latest and greatest, and this is a simple script, right? This is your traditional script that I created. If I run this, it's going to bring up the application under test. It's going to go through what you would expect, right? So this, think of it as a process. It's going to be used as part of a workflow. So this is going to use our application under test. Our infamous Advantage demo is going to click through speakers, tablets, and do its thing. Now, right now, when I created this script, one of the things I used was simply, the object recognition that's built into the solution, right? So nothing special, nothing magical out there. Now, once this finishes running, I want to show you the next thing that we'll be talking about. And one of the things that I always encourage folks to do is, even if this is not going to be used for testing, right? This is probably not going to be a test that's going to be used for automated testing of the application or anything. This is going to be more an automation script. Still, when you're designing this, certainly include transactions, start and end transaction, right? So this is, I'm going to call this by something, and then finish it off with another transaction. Now you say, well, what's the purpose of this? Very simple. This is because when you're debugging, you want to make sure that this is a process that runs efficiently. Now, imagine if I just create a login process, I run it once, and life is good, right? Everything's great. You throw it over the wall, and all of a sudden, it takes 18 minutes to log in, right? So we're looking for those things. Whenever I run this, I want to be able to get an average of the time. I want to, in the results page, you get the actual time it took for this transaction to finish. So you want to make sure that you don't have anything strange going on where you run this, and the third time all of a sudden it takes 20 minutes to log in. Well, then you have a problem. Now imagine what your end user is going to say if they come back and say, Julio, this is great, thanks for the login. However, it took 18 minutes and we sat there waiting, right, for this thing to finish. And in fact, it might have even potentially caused an error down the line with the rest of the process. Now, part of this, right, data is a huge part of this, but also make sure that you have your active screen turned on. Why? Because, well, there's going to be someone that is going to continue this maintenance going forward. So you want to take advantage. Again, let the software do the work for you. Let it self-document. For those of you that are not familiar with this particular feature in UFT, it actually documents or shows anywhere in the application that I recorded where I clicked. So right now, if my colleague was to log in and go into the script, they would be able to tell that, well, Julio went in here and clicked on Advantage Demo, and then he went to this particular page, to the laptop screen, and then he went on to the screen with the mice, right? So a lot of heavy lifting done for you automatically, so you don't have to document this process. Now, the other thing too is when it comes to maintainability, make sure that you take advantage of those features for modularity, right? So for example, if I'm going to expand this particular script, and part of that process is going to be adding a new function for contacting the store, right, with a question perhaps for one of the products. Now, I can certainly record this into action one, right, include it all one massive script. Really not the best way to go, right? So I'm going to create a new reusable function, make sure that it is a reusable action, because then this makes it callable from another script, right? So this really expands the horizons as far as reusability, as far as flexibility, and building that central library of reusable assets. So we click OK, and then we end up with a blank slate. And now we can go in and record our application under test, just as before. However, the big difference now is that I'm recording a process for contact us, and I'm entering some data. Some question, right? And we submit. Now, part of this also is object recognition. Let's talk about the last topic here, or the second to last topic, and that is object recognition. Once again, let the software do the work for you, right? So, of course, let me start with the, we'll work directly from the object repository. Now, many different ways of recognizing objects today. So in an application, typically, I'm going to give myself a little real estate. An application quite often may not recognize objects because, like I said, there might be a new toolkit that's just became available. We're not able to work with it directly, not for another version or two, and so on and so forth. So you have options. One of those options is the ability to create an insight object. Now, what is an insight object? An insight object really lets you point on the screen to where this object is and set the delimiters. In other words, what is the screen area where this object is? So it's very simple to use. I point to the page, and then I say, okay, let's say this popular items is not really it's not behaving the way I expected it to. So I'm going to go ahead and save it, and now it adds it to the object repository. What can I do with this? Anything you can do with any object that you would normally expect. So I can add it to, let me add it to a new line. I can add it to the script by just dragging and dropping it over, and you can see that it inserts that insight object. Of course, you want to rename it to something a little bit more reasonable, more human readable, and so on. However, let's take that a step further. One of the things that we've added to UFT recently is AI technology, right? So AI technology lets us recognize objects on the screen as seen by the user. Now, one of the things I could do is manually identify. I'm going to go ahead and skip that. Let's talk about AI recording, where I can point and click to objects on the application. Now, this is going to take a second because it's actually going to scan the application, but we'll go here. You can see that it asked me to point to the page. It is scanning the page. It's automatically building a compilation of objects that are on screen. This could be text objects. It could be graphical objects as well. So in a couple of seconds, we're going to see it with the various delimiters on here. Okay, so it's building the object list. Now you see that it came back with a series of objects. Objects in purple recognized by text. Anything in red is recognized as a graphic object. So this is great because it doesn't tie it statically to the underlying hooks of the object itself, right? Instead, it is looking at it from a graphical perspective or a text perspective. In fact, I can also tell it, I want you to find this object in relation to another object. But in this case, I'm just going to say, okay, I just want to click on this object, special offer. So it clicks, and it automatically adds the statements for that particular click. Now, what did I do here? Here, I was able to disengage from the underlying, object ID, the GUID, anything that's really going to cause a problem if it changes, the developer changes the application. And finally, last concept that I want to talk about is, it goes back to addressing the need for a centralized library. Built into the product, and certainly take advantage, is integration with Git, right? So you can see here, it's a little small, but it's that little red icon, meaning that there have been changes to the script. And right now I'm going to go ahead and save those changes, and I'm going to do a Git commit. So right now I'm committing it to the repository, and this is going to be a new script. We click OK, and then finally I am going to push this out to my repository, right? So we'll do a Git push. Gives me an official warning message. I put another description in here. We click OK, and now this is part of a repository. So this, it prevents that need to have a shared drive somewhere with a whole bunch of folders. This is a more organized process, certainly a safer process, by the way, because any changes will be controlled via branches and controlled commits and pushes out to the repository. So that is in a nutshell. Yes.
Go ahead. I'm just going to say, can you wrap it up, because we've got still Chris to go. So,
yep.
Go ahead.
Okay, no, that's so I'm good. Thank you everyone for inviting me, and that's UFT best practices in a nutshell. Thank you.
Okay, so let me take the screen here. Sorry, should have been prepped for that. Okay, are you guys seeing my screen? Let me double check.
Yeah, the full screen.
Yep, okay, all right, so I'm gonna go to full screen. Okay, switch that, and there we go. So we did that. Okay, Chris, you're up.
All right, thanks, Joe. So as Julio and as Eric kind of alluded, I'm going to cover some of the things they've done as well, but I'm going to add to it from the automation flow, the OO flow design aspect of it, some of the best practices just in working with the tools. So I don't know who all is familiar with the legacy OO Studio application that was used for building these designs before RPA came about, but it was more a distributed model where every developer, every author had to install the application on their own system, set everything up, had their own workspaces. With RPA Designer, we have kind of a merger. There's still a little bit of distribution, but we now have a centralized designer workspace that everybody can leverage. Great for multi-author platform, but some of the rules that we have to follow still come into play just from a best practices in architecture design. So when we get multiple authors involved here, right, having somebody that maybe not be familiar with your current project step in, having the ability to easily take on and add to a project, we need to look at the consistent design behind all of our different projects. So we've kind of come up with this standard project. As Eric would create a new project in Designer here, we would go through and build the same folder structure. We would go through and define the same areas for inputs, for flow variables, for recordings, for the flows, for the functions, so that as anybody else steps in behind us, it's very easy to pick up and run with what's been built. We do still have, like I said, a little bit of distribution. We have within RPA Designer, we also have that integration with Git. But from an RPA perspective, the UFT bits, the recordings themselves are actually not part of that. This is more the flow definition, the wire design, the diagram that we're looking at here. That is all synchronized with Git. But within our own workspace, we also have to realize you've got to make sure that you're in sync. There's nothing worse than going into a project and spending half a day making some changes and updates to only realize that somebody else had already made some changes and didn't commit them, or we didn't fetch them before we started. So make sure as you go through this, as you're getting into the design aspect, that we really leverage that integration with Git and our ability to version control and sync with that central repository. The other aspect of doing design, and Eric kind of alluded to this, Julio alluded to it, goes into that modular design aspect of build one flow per recording. That allows us to actually define all of our inputs. It allows us to define all of our user inputs as well as recording requirements, the variables that are used throughout the actual recording. And I think to answer somebody's question from earlier, it's at this point right here where you define the flow on top of the recording that allows you to kind of mix that static input, user input, and some of the dynamic nature of using a function to combine or manipulate some of that data in a more dynamic fashion to then pass all of the proper information into the recordings as we replay them. So Joe, if you want to go to the next slide. So this deals a little bit more again with deploying and working with the designs as we've built them. So as I said a moment ago, the UFT recordings themselves don't get synced with Git from within this workspace. Now, launching that UFT interface from the designer, allowing you to manage your recordings that way is definitely useful. But here we have to remember that it's only the automation design that goes into our Git repository. We also do have to be cautious of versioning, because you can version your UFT, each iteration of your UFT recording, or each iteration of your actual flow. When you combine this into an RPA content pack, if your versions don't match, the artifacts won't synchronize as well. So just some gotchas that we have when you're working with multiple environments. So again, a best practice that we have developed is only needing to design or only needing to install Designer once, regardless of the number of environments you have for actual RPA Central and executing. If you build everything in one place, you can capture that content, create the content pack, you then load that into your other RPA environments. So build in dev, deploy to prod. A couple of things that allows you to do is verify that you have all those versions, all of those links intact, so that your content pack is reusable, and that resiliency comes into play there as well. So we can use a development environment, build it, create the content pack, deploy it in prod, execute, test, and validate our work from an environment that we don't have to continually create different workspaces for different environments in. I think if we want to switch to the next slide real quick. So going back to some of the content, some of the options that Julio and Eric alluded to before, yes, as you know, you can make a single recording as complicated as you want to, but then, trying to go back and troubleshoot that, there's give and take. We can capture everything, run it once. If there's a problem, who knows how long it's going to take to drill down to find the root cause and resolve it. So another best practices is to use that modular approach, break down the complex recording into individual actions, whether it's by platform, whether, like Eric had mentioned, a complete onboarding process. You got to add to payroll, you got to add to, Office 365, you've got to add to several different platforms. Well, rather than making a single complex recording to capture all of that, you break that down and create a recording for your payroll management system, a separate recording for your Office platform, separate recording for your Active Directory information. And as RPA, we kind of refer to those as Legos, or the building blocks, right? And in RPA Designer, you can then use this workflow grid to do all the wire together, right? So it gives us more visibility into what's actually going on, and less of a drill down, or less of a complex environment to drill down to problems if we do have any. With each release of RPA, this is getting better and better as well. But one of the things that I wanted to call out are some of the things that Eric had mentioned with the Python operations. So whether you have to create your own flow, your own task to manipulate that data, save it, and call it as a Python operation, or whether you just do that inline input using Python expressions. Some of the earlier releases of RPA had a very limited expression capability at the individual input layer. So we were doing more and more of the build a Python operation, store it, and then call it on demand. Now more and more of that is being worked into the RPA designer natively. So as we move on to the next slide, that goes into some of the comparisons between what we had in, sorry, Joe, if you wanted to switch to the next slide.
Yeah, I did want to make one quick comment to the modular design thing. I wanted to call out the screen here. I think you can probably see it, but it's simply a login process, right? So again, UFT can be as complicated or as not. But one of the things that we discovered is when you run these robots and they run frequently, sometimes you run into the problem where, for whatever reason, it didn't cleanly exit the process, right? So, you know, you try to log in, you're on the wrong page, it fails. So then you go in and log off, and then you go in and log in again, and then it works, right? So that's, again, we're not dictating that that's how you should do it. The other thing is that this is actually functionality that Julio kind of inferred that you can do inside the UFT level. But, you know, we do login, then add user flow, then, you know, things like that, right? So that is really the context that we're trying to get to. So Chris, I'm going to move the slide so you can pick it back up here.
Okay. Yep. Thanks, Joe. So yeah, to add to that, I'll have one more slide in a moment that I can add to that even more from the UFT side. But and I don't know, I think from the polls, there weren't a lot of people in here that are legacy OO or ITOM platform users. But again, for those who might be familiar with the old OO Studio, that is, you know, that's where my bread and butter came from, right? I've worked with that since it was started, and so having to move from that old Studio, you know, heavy Java interface, compiled XML, into this new web-based designer using YAML and that, you know, direct inline edit, as Eric had mentioned before, direct code or graphical wiring. I've had to kind of learn some of the differences between them and slowly move over into the web designer. And again, as I said, with each release of RPA, with the 2011 release of RPA, more and more of this has been incorporated into designer. But again, where we used to have problems with designer that we were used to in the old OO Studio was that ability to break down those inputs and give us, you know, we could define a default, and we had some options from step to step where you could assign to an input from a global variable, or assign from an input something that was defined in an earlier step, passing those variables along. That didn't used to exist in some of the earlier versions of designer, but now it does. And then those filters. Eric actually gave some great examples of filters, which pre-2011 didn't really exist. So we would, by nature, have whatever string came out as that standard out or standard error, we wouldn't be able to change that unless we built that standalone Python operation to do something with it and then save it as a new variable, passing it on. But more and more of that has been worked in line as what we refer to filters. So the differences are becoming less and less each go round, but some of the things that we still have that we're still working towards, right? In the legacy Studio Designer, you could do all of this recording, build your flow, and then when you go to execute it, be presented with a pop-up for any inputs that were required that didn't have data. And again, legacy, moving into the web designer, this RPA designer, if we ran that, it wouldn't prompt us for anything. If we had a required input and it was just missing, the flow would fail. So a little bit of troubleshooting we'd have to go into. But again, knowing that and identifying where those breaks and those differences are has helped me to not only build better flows within the RPA designer, but as we go back and, like Eric was saying, with that kind of like the call home, if you will, that the ability to report what we're finding, what we're dealing with, what we're working through in the product back to Micro Focus, each iteration of RPA is incorporating more and more of that. And then the last piece to wrap up with, I think, is just, again, that conversion of, if you're used to the old designs, everything was, you know, executing functions as JavaScript, and now we're not using JavaScript anymore. We're using Python as our base. gives us, I think, direction moving to the future, and brings that whole centralized workspace to that multi-author environment very, very well. So I think with that, oh yeah, sorry, one last, just some things that Julio had mentioned. I forgot about this. At each iteration of that integrated UFT recorder, or RPA's activity recorder, when we would work with this in the past, we have found that it does not always capture the screen that you want if you're running multiple tabs within the same browser. So again, as a best practice that we've adopted, we would launch the web designer itself within an incognito window in Chrome, and then when we run our record settings, the browsers that would pop up, not being an incognito window, kept that recording focused on specifically what we were trying to record. Not only that, but it also helped with playback. As Julio said, with the latest versions of UFT and adding more and more browser support, we should be able to do more of this with either Chrome or Edge, or Chromium-based browsers. And then the final definition here, going back to resilience. Yeah, go ahead, Joe, to that last slide. This is an example kind of tying both what Eric and Julio said together, where on the left we've got the RPA recording, just the raw recording, right directly from the activity designer, and that object recognition does a really good job. We are capturing most everything, but with that unknown variable of we didn't define the web application, and so we're somewhat restricted to what they built, right? Some of the web forms that are JavaScript based and they don't load as a separate object, we still had some hard times replaying some of our recordings, but with that interaction and the ability to directly edit the UFT recording, we have also found that we've been able to add just a few, couple of little scripted entries to the recording to make it much more resilient. And when we've had to manually go in and identify some of those additional objects, or change from the RPA's native recording over to that AI object recognition, we can do that, and then we can actually edit the UFT code directly from the RPA web interface, save it, it updates directly into RPA, so that as we go back and run these flows, they're, I really can't say bulletproof, but as close to bulletproof as we could get, making them those reusable actions, and then we can wire them into the bigger use cases as we go through that. So I think I'll end there. Do we have any good questions? Yeah, go ahead, Joe. Let's turn it back over to Joe.
Yeah, I think we're kind of at the bottom of the hour. I'll go a few minutes over. Eric, you want to do your use case, and then I think we'll wrap up from there, if you're all right with that.
Yeah, I can certainly do that.
Yeah, I'll run the slides so we don't have to go back.
So I talked about one use case before. This happens to be another one. In fact, this is probably one of the oldest known RPA use cases. This was built prior to us actually having the RPA product. So originally assembled with operations orchestration and UFT assembled together by the client. But this was a banking customer of ours. And they were challenged with an inefficient process, slow time to response. And basically what this was is, if you need to make a change to your direct deposit for your home loan in a bank in Australia, requires you to go through a lot of checks and a lot of processes. The banks in Australia work a little bit differently when it comes to how they work. You can actually use them as a checking account and pay, have your direct deposit go directly into your home loan. But what was happening is, every time you picked up the phone and said, I need to change some direct deposit information and change my account information, they routinely said it was like 2 to 4 weeks in order for us to go through the change. When they implemented an RPA process, and in the very first 2 months, they processed 15,000 loan variations as a result. And in the first year, they saved 120,000 days of customer wait time. I mean, think about that time of all the users waiting on hold, waiting for updates to be made, and on the back end, over 11,000 hours of manual processing. So the number of employees required to take that, and the reason why is on the next slide here, Joe, if you want to build that out. So if you look at the original process in blue up top, this was 14 days to go through all of the different steps. It was manual handoff after manual handoff after manual verification, bundling and packaging things up to send to an offshore team to bundle and double check and verify and reconfirm and make sure everything was handled correctly. And a lot of that time was because of the manual handoffs or just even dealing with within each one of those dark blue boxes. So the transition to RPA, they basically created a single end-to-end process that ran in less than a day. And the side effect is not only were they able to shrink the time because they were able to automate each of the steps, they automated the handoff between each of the different steps as well. But then they got rid of the offshore team completely because they could just maintain a very small onshore handling, exception handling team, and they didn't have to worry about sending the data offshore. So when you think about security and privacy of data, keeping sensitive information within your country, things like these had a huge impact. So ultimately, things like time to market was definitely one of the benefits, but increased security, reduction of time required to train employees on the process, and just more consistency when it came to implementing the process. So to go from 14 days down to less than a day, going from a series of manual handoffs with a series of manual processes in between to a full end-to-end automated process was a very significant improvement, and that contributed to almost 12,000 hours of savings in that first year. And that's just on the very first use case. Joe, I'm done with that. So if anybody has any questions around other use cases, certainly you can either add them to the chat or reach out to us after. We'd be happy to go through some either more use cases, some customer successes, but appreciate your time today.
Yeah, so let me wrap up here. Just wanted to call up as a reminder that on Vivit's website, they have their virtual community day presentations available. This will be, as it's been recorded, you'll get the details on that. I think, also in the slides that get sent to you are contact info. So if you have questions explicitly, we'll certainly do that. And I think at this point, I'll cut it off. Thank you very much.